Greetings once again, unfortunate information victim. If you've been following the Super Connected Conversations YouTube series or the podcast, then you probably know that this entire project began life in an album that I've written and recorded and a film that I've made, neither of which I am ready to release yet. So in the meantime, I thought I would talk to the kind of people that feel the same way I do about the way the world's changing, the way we connect, and how technology is either changing, influencing, or improving our ways of connection. And some of the books that have led me down this four or 5 year journey: Naomi Klein, The Shock Doctrine, massive influence on all the songs that I've written for Super Connected. Alone Together by Sherry Turkle. If you haven't read it, definitely add that to your collection. More recently, David Boehm on Dialogue. Now, there's one book which I wish had existed when I started writing Super Connected, and but I know I didn't find out about it until about 6 months ago. And the book is, without doubt, I think one of the most important books to be published in many, many years. It's called The Costs of Connection, and it is by Nick Couldry and Ulises Mejias. And it's about how data is colonizing human life and appropriating it for capitalism. These are the issues that I have written about and studied since 2010, when I was working at Apple for a very short period. And it's not a book about goodies and baddies, it's a book about imagination and how we can use ours to create a different future, because the way things are going doesn't look particularly sustainable. I don't know how many people want to be plugged in constantly to apps and devices, but I just don't believe that most of us do anymore. So it's been a real privilege to talk to everyone on this show, but especially the authors of this book. This, I think, in years to come, is going to be seminal in the way we reconstruct the world that we're living in. So very privileged to talk to Nick Couldry and Ulises Mejias in this Super Connected conversation about the costs of connection.
The feelings coming through your fingertips. Don't slide for more. Don't slide for more.
Thank you so much, both of you, for agreeing to come and have this conversation with me. I've explained about the book, The Cost of Connection, very minutely, but with great excitement. Nick, you know already, we've been in touch a little bit about your book and what it's meant to me and how significant I think it is. Can I ask you, maybe you to start, Nick, how this came about, how the cost of connection was a decision to make this into a book? And that, obviously, I would love to know that from both of you.
Well, I mean, we can each start, Ulises, can't we? I mean, we converge pretty quick. Do you want to start?
You have a much more detailed history, so I think you should start. I'll fill in the blanks.
I have this elephantine memory, I'm afraid, so I remember all the dates. But basically, Ulises and I had met at a conference, I don't know, about 2010 or 11, got on really well. Didn't like the conference very much, but we got on well, and found a real connection. Ulises tipped me off about a great article he'd written, and then tipped me off when he had a new book coming out, which was called Off the Network, which I immediately liked the title of, and I read it and I was really impressed, and then recommended it to my students, and it was their favorite book of the year at LSE. And I told Ulises that, and I guess he found that encouraging. And then about a year later, maybe something like that, 18 months, got in touch out of the blue and said, let's do something together. And I think originally it was going to be an article or something like that. And then I had an opportunity to maybe propose a book. So I said, well, why did we make it a book? We didn't quite know what it was yet, but we thought we had a good instinct. And we then started at the beginning of 16, which was just after Shoshana Zuboff's famous article called Big Other that led to her, blockbusting book had come out. So that was a little bit of an inspiration, but we'd already decided we were going to do something really critical about data and platforms. We both knew in our bones this wasn't being said at that time. Something had to be done. There had to be an intervention. And then it took about 2 or 3 months. We basically, because we didn't know each other well, we just tried, not very different from when I've been in music situations, actually. We just tried ideas out. I wrote a few paragraphs. Ulises tried something out just to see if there was any resonance. And very quickly, we found there were a lot of resonances. There was something happening. And then within 2 or 3 months, amazingly, within a day or two, we somehow got the core idea that this wasn't just about a colonial take on what was happening with data, but something much bigger, which was a genuinely new colonialism could be starting, building on the old, of course, but something really deep, really history changing. And once we got that, then we knew we were onto something, and nothing was going to stop us having a go at making it a book. And then fairly soon we got a contract, and that was mid-16. It took about 3 years to write. Does that sound fair, Ulises?
Yes, no, I'm glad you provided the timeline, because I'm really bad with dates. But I think what I would add is, reflecting on the project as a whole, I think it might sound weird for us to be writing about colonialism. And I think we've fielded questions about, what gives you the right, not to put it that way. And usually the questions are not that confrontational, but why would we write about colonialism? And I think that speaks to the great collaboration that this project represents. I think, I don't know if, Nick, you identify as a historian, but I don't. And so I think the first question is, why would we write about this history when we're not trained historians? And I think for us, what's really important is just the ability to trace the continuities, the resonances, what happened in that historical period that resonates today. And so, yes, Nick writing from his particular context in the UK. I'm writing from my own context as someone born in Mexico, but who migrated to the US and now works there. So I think for us, it felt like a good fit and a good critical space to just write about these things, even though, we don't do colonialism academically. And even though we might not be the kind of subjects that would be writing about these things, but we found it a very fruitful framework to just talk about what we wanted to say.
What I really love about your work with this, and I don't know your work before the Costs of Connection, but it's true, it's conscientious, it's about the value of communities. It's about freedom. It's even about freedom of speech, actually, and not being constrained by all the restrictions that big tech put on us as a kind of condition of us being able to participate in those platforms and the way they help us or force us to connect, depending on your point of view. It often struck me when I was in my late teens, in the 90s, there was a kind of revision of the 60s counterculture. The Doors movie came out. These great inspiring figures like Jim Morrison and Jimi Hendrix, going back even further, Billie Holiday. For me as a musician, these characters that throughout history had stood up against any kind of establishment removal of rights and freedoms. And in the 90s, it felt very much like, where are they now? Where are they now? and fast forward to I guess the last 5-10 years, it's like this not to be found actually in popular culture. So I and I think many of my generation probably look to writers to be, it used to be pop stars, rock stars, and actors would be citing writers and their work in order to cause some kind of either civil unrest or social activism, you know. But now it just seems, David Graeber is another writer that I love. You probably both know, and it seems that it's just the rock stars are the writers now. Did you get a sense of this being what I feel is potentially the first of its kind, and in terms of calling out and naming what's happening with big tech and data to the whole world, really? Now, I mean, there are other books I know around that touch on this, but there isn't been. So I had not heard of the term data colonialism until this book, obviously, or the cloud empire, which I think is fantastic. I mean, as a songwriter, it just seemed every chapter had great names for potential songs and characters. It's such a kind of, there's a new language that's come out of your book, terminologies, and which I felt utterly embedded in the meanings of those terms, but hadn't seen them given a sort of title until I read the book. It feels like if people read the book, it could make you both into a sort of, you know, I don't know, similar to some of the figures in the late 60s counterculture period, like Bobby Seale and people like that, who are absolutely causing trouble with powerful organizations, and you call them out by name in this. Would you call yourselves rebels?
With or without a cost? I think that's the question. Yes. I don't know. I'm not sure I'm ready to be a rock star. What do you think?
Did you say that again, Ulises? What did you say?
Well, rebels with or without a cause. I was wondering, you know, what kind of rebels, and I was also saying that I'm not exactly sure I'm ready to be a rock star, but I don't know, Nick, how about you?
Well, I was a musician, but certainly not a rock star, and I've got no longer any aspirations for that. But I think what you're tapping into, Tim, is that writing the book did feel a bit lonely at some time, because when we started it, it looks really different looking back now. Zuboff had just done one article. It had been really successful, it's true, but you know, it was a standout. There was nothing else like it, remotely like that at that time. And we were looking for comfort, and we were happy to get comfort from her vision that something was deeply wrong with platforms, with Google in particular and Facebook. And it gave us a lot of support, actually. But apart from that, we were looking to philosophers, and we were looking all over the map. There wasn't much around. There was some, but not much. The irony is that as we went on, and as we got close to finishing it, it became clear that more and more people were coming out with critical books. I mean, many of them are ones that, you know, you read if you're specialists like we are, reading all the stuff that comes out. But then, of course, we knew that Zuboff was going to have what was almost certainly going to be a big book. And she was just a little bit ahead of us. And I met her, actually. And, you know, we found a lot of common ground, but also we knew we had something different. And her book came out a few months afterwards. So I think for a lot of people, her idea of surveillance capitalism really has sort of taken over the landscape. It's said enough. The Financial Times loves that, because it implies, you know, capitalism's okay, but just some bad guys out there. We just need to get them under control, get everything back on track. Capitalism can go on with the job. But what we're saying is that something's rotten in the whole state of capitalism. It's the whole thing that's rotten now. That's what we've got to challenge. And some people don't see the difference between what we're saying and Zuboff, but actually, when you think at the end point we're going to, it's fundamentally different. It's challenging the whole thing, not just a few bad apples. So we knew that from, and I think it's fair to say, Ulysses, we felt a little bit lonely writing this because it wasn't obvious who was going to back it. But we decided we just had to do this. And yeah, we just went on, and we found inspiration, for example, from philosophers, First Nation writers from Canada. Ulysses was particularly good at finding sources like that, literary sources. You know, I mean, we were looking for all inspiration all over the map. So I have no idea how many people in the end will read it, but it certainly felt a bit lonely at the time. We felt like pioneers, even if it turns out we weren't quite as original as you thought, because a lot of people have been thinking this for the past 10 years. There's actually been a wave building. We're just part of a much bigger wave that's just coming into view now.
It's interesting you say you felt lonely writing it. If I may, I just sort of want to reflect that, as you already know, Nick and Ulysses. I'll send it to you. But the songs that I've been writing mostly for the last 4 or 5 years about these subjects, about big tech and about, you know, the hierarchy, these huge companies up here and these families down here just plugged into their Amazon Prime and whatever it is, and how that impacts is affecting us as human beings. I felt lonely and also potentially completely mistaken and ready for ridicule. And I haven't released any of it yet, really, apart from one song. So I've yet to find out. But certainly, I've had a continued sense of people around me, just friends and sometimes colleagues, kind of looking at my preoccupation with tech and if it's evil or if it's broken or corrupt as a kind of verging on a sort of paranoid, weird conspiracy theorist that she's like, look, you just need to get a handle on this, Tim. This is life now. We've all got Amazon accounts. We all use iPhones. We all have to use Facebook. Just deal with it, man. Get on with it, you know. And of course, I don't have children, so I haven't got that extra push, which is, I have time. Lucky, I have time to sit back and go, is this right? You know, many of my friends don't have that luxury because they've just got to respond a lot to family needs and those pressures. But I really hear that sense of feeling lonely. And I just wondered, perhaps not in the UK, but in America, it's traditionally, historically, it's been a really dangerous thing to be pointing the finger at large companies. Ulises, I wonder how you felt about that in writing, you know, and all the big names are in there, Google and Apple and Amazon, and by the end of the book, it's pretty clear, and you're fair, and it doesn't feel like you're blaming people, but you are absolutely making them accountable in the same way, you know, Carol Cadwell-Adams made Cambridge Analytica accountable in the same way that you know, countless smaller beings have been looking at large companies. What's that like in being in North America?
Yeah, it's interesting for sure, because it does feel a little bit like the belly of the beast. Although we're talking about things that by now are obviously global. And so in terms of the impact, we would argue that it's felt across the world. But it's true that it did feel a little bit lonely. And this kind of critique, actually, when I published my first book, one of the comments I got was that this is not the kind of stuff that's read here in the United States, maybe in Europe, which maybe was a good motivation for reaching out to Nick to see if he wanted to write something together. But I think some things have changed. And I think specifically, you already mentioned Cambridge Analytica. I think that was crucial in terms of changing how the public feels about these things. The Edward Snowden revelations, for sure. Also, I think that's when people started to wonder, okay, what's going on behind the scenes? And I think culturally, and to go back to your point about music, and this is a little bit of a joke, because I do tell my students the third thing that changed things was the series Black Mirror, because I think culturally it sort of gave us a language to start. It's okay to critique some of these things. Look, some of this is not, doesn't make sense. It are things we should question. So I think that cultural aspect that you were talking about when you mentioned subversive music, it's true. I'm not very familiar with the music scene today. Maybe we're lacking subversive rock stars. But I think films such as yours, which I have had the honor and privilege to watch, I think it very much feels like a space where film makers are producing this kind of critique. There's excellent documentaries around, and journalists also that are publishing lots of interesting stuff. So the mood has shifted. I think it's become more acceptable to be critical about these things. And I very much see your film as part of this conversation about these issues.
Thank you. I mean, I said to Nick the other day, it's such a weird thing to have read the book after you read your book after making the Super Connected film, because you encapsulated the things that hadn't been encapsulated that I was grasping for in the songs and the story in the film. I want to ask you, Nick, about the nature of the costs of connection and how the root of it and all subjects associated with it are to do with solving problems. There are problems in society, and we come up with solutions. And a huge solution in certainly the 21st century has been technology. It solves a lot of problems authentically, and then it poses to be solving other problems. And what's so interesting is that your book is trying to solve the problem of a so-called solution for the problem of how we manage life. And I wondered how it feels at the moment, just to you personally. I'd like both of you to respond to this in just your daily life with your family and where does it affect you? The subscriptions, the invasiveness, the surveillance, any of it.
Well, maybe I could just go one step back first, because I think if you
Sure.
start from daily life, the problem is you get the sort of reactions you're getting from your friends. You say, come on, we need to organize something fast. Don't mess around. Use Facebook, just get on with it. If you're in yoga, everyone uses Facebook. There's no other way to do it if you're going to be a brilliant yoga teacher. So daily life is a bit of a problem because it's been colonized basically by tech. So actually, another person who was before us was a Russian radical, Morozov, Yevgeny Morozov, who has the brilliant idea of solutionism. Everyone wants solutions, but he comes up with this idea that corporations in recent years have branded themselves as the people who have the solutions to the problems of everyday life. They just occupy that place of the people who solve things. And we're predisposed to believe them, just like when coronavirus started spreading. We think, oh, well, there's an app for that. Let's start tracking it. Proved to be completely harebrained, doesn't work, and so on. But, Apple and Google had the solution, and a lot of governments around the world seemed to believe them for a while. And that links to something that it seems to be about offering us convenience and nice things, but actually it's more about power. It's about the idea of governing our lives in a radically different way. If you offer a total solution, pardon that awful phrase, but we are talking of something that broad, a total solution for the organization of daily life, depending on a certain tech, from which certain people happen to profit rather a lot, and you're persuasive enough to get that into people's heads, it's pretty difficult to unpack that once you've done that. So it's about social order. So if you start with the daily habits, you can't get back to the problem, which is this idea of an order that's being imposed on us through these little solutions, these moments of convenience and so on. So you've got to step back and see the whole thing. And there is this bigger vision of fixing our lives, literally rebuilding life for us so that profit can be generated out of it the whole time. And
It's in,
that's the core. That's
yeah.
really new. That's a new 20, 30 years ago. It wasn't even imaginable by corporations. They didn't know how to do it. Now they do.
It's interesting you're saying the total solution. There's a track I wrote on the album, the film that you've seen, called "The Complete Solution."
Yeah, it's a better phrase.
Which was specifically actually part of Apple's core training, as it's called, core training. You do at Apple. When I worked at Apple, and the complete solution was so you could sell a product in store, or you could pitch for the complete solution. And I remember when I started there, I thought, this sounds great. What is it? All it was that you can buy a laptop, or you can buy a laptop with one-on-one learning added on, and a 2-year protection plan, and that was the complete solution. So and throw in some accessories as well. It's this whole thing of making sure if somebody comes in and to spend £1, that they end up spending £3, and it's such a trite sort of reason for interfering with life. It's just like there are actually things that really require solutions, but actually, whether or not I've got a green or a yellow cover for my iPad is not one of them. Ulises, what about you in terms of the impact that you feel day to day in ordinary life?
Right. Well, yes, because I think, as you and as Nick are suggesting, these solutions are just so much part of our lives now that it's hard to imagine living without them, and it's hard to imagine going back. No one wants to go back to an era before mobile phones, when it was so easy to, just arrange meetings on the go. So I think that's the one part that we need to be careful about and honest about our own role in participating and deriving enjoyment and satisfaction from this system. Because especially when we talk about this new order of colonialism, I think it's just easy to assume that we are simple victims, passive victims, that our role is just to consume and to apply, and we're completely powerless to resist, which may or may not be true, depending to what degree we want to analyze it. But I think the issue is that we derive so much satisfaction from using these tools that sometimes, it's impossible to think about just giving them up, because we are active participants in this new order. We are active contributors to this order. We get customization, we get enlarged social circles, we get so much out of it that it's difficult to see where the problem might be. And I think that's the biggest challenge, frankly, to this kind of analysis, that it's really difficult and becoming increasingly more difficult to step back and to see just how this emerging order is colonizing, occupying so many aspects of our lives.
Tools is a really interesting word, isn't it? Because it's a hammer is the classic tool, which you can build a house with, or you can kill somebody with. It's both extremes. A tool is classically, traditionally, it can be used or abused, and it feels that the way you talk about big tech and social media platforms in that way, that it's not which what I love mostly is that you've presented it in a way that it isn't either or. It's not like we've got to get rid of technology, but actually start to be a bit more self-aware of how we use it in our lives and how much we're really getting from it. But the bit of the book that really keeps kind of winding me up in a good way is the word colonialism. It just makes you think of slavery when you hear that word, right? the colonies. It just takes you. It's and I think it's genius that you've made that connection. That what we're all participating in is the ultimate kind of slavery, which is all of us. Which sounds dramatic to some people, but I don't know how dramatic it is, because it is through social media platforms that we've ended up with TV talk shows, show hosts running America and things like that. Do you know what I mean? Those are all partially responsible for some of the, Brexit in the UK, or all these kind of issues that I think 20 years ago that will never happen. That would never happen, and it's an insanity that's made possible a lot by algorithms and the control of data. We know that, and it's people aren't voted in; they're bought in, or they're persuaded in with very, very clever posts on Facebook and other such platforms. Do you see what your desires for a world that is more conscious of what's happening and more in control of what's happening, something that can happen in our lifetimes? Or do you think this is like at the beginning of a long haul? Because they're giants, aren't they, these corporates? And they've got their tentacles very much into every part, whether it's the pharmaceutical industry, government, the military complex. It's completely sewn up in a way that when you just need to get your kid to school on time and then get to a meeting, you haven't got time to sort of say, okay, we're going to shut down all the computers in the house and that's it, I'm leaving Facebook, which is the immediate reaction. How do you feel? Maybe it's an unfair question, but I still want to know the answer. As just individuals, those of us who haven't done what you've done and really studied the raw material of what's happening, how, as individuals, can we, in our own little way, contribute to sort of revealing what's happening to the point where we don't accept it anymore?
Well, the funny thing is, you say no one could have predicted it. But something we discovered after we finished the book, having, as I said, been a bit of a lonely process writing it, was Norbert Wiener, who was one of the great mathematicians behind computing in the first place, the very idea of computing, wrote the book Cybernetics in 1948. In the preface, which turns out he wrote in Mexico City, we've no idea why, he said, and he was writing 3 years after the atomic bomb was exploded, I've been thinking for a while, even before the atomic bomb, that there are two dangers we face today. One is the atomic bomb, and the other is connected computers. That can organize the world, that they are just they are a force for good, great good, or great evil. 1948, almost completely ignored.
Wow.
Unbelievable. He saw that because he understood you can govern the society through computers. You just connect them up. It's that simple. And you connect them up in a certain way. And that's the core of what we're saying. This is the cost of connections have been there right since they started connecting. If you had the vision of Wiener, but no one listened. No one listened at all. So in that sense, we don't think anyone should feel guilty about saying no, but we can't do it individually. We have to do it collectively together, because this really is a social order, an economic order being built that we're all linked into, we're all plugged into. So you can't just unplug yourself, because it's going to go on anyway without you, because it's an order. So we have to help each other build what it means to unplug ourselves. And Ulises started that with his previous book. He was already theorizing that's what brought us together in the first place with Off the Network. So that's the way, it's a collective thing that we have to do.
That's great to hear. Ulises, I'm sorry, I haven't read your first book, but obviously I'm going to. Off the Network, is that in a similar, is that a similar expression to Off the Grid that we hear a lot?
Yes, for sure. And that title was actually chosen by the editor because, they thought this would be more attractive to the public. But yes, I think...
Got to have a snappy title.
Gotta have a snappy title, always, as you know very well. But I think just in 1 minute, if I can just talk about the difference between the two books or the alignment, I think in Off the Network, which is the earlier book, I was still thinking about what it means about the possibilities to opt out, to be outside of the network, what it would mean, where are those spaces. Whereas in the second book, I think, not to sound too pessimistic, but I started to recognize a world where it was becoming not very much possible to step outside of the network. So the possibilities to opt out of the system were becoming fewer and fewer. So I think that's kind of what we were trying to do with the second book. But Tim, I think it's very important also to go back to an earlier point you made about slavery and such, because I think when we start to talk about colonialism, I think, yes, it evokes so much in our historical memories and in what we learned in school. And so people think we're using it metaphorically. People think we say, okay, what happened for 500 years, now we're saying that what's happening today is like colonialism. And actually in the book, we make the case that it is not, we're not using the term metaphorically. We are acknowledging that there are very important differences in terms of the context, the scales, and we must not forget those differences. But there's also one very important similarity between the old historical colonialism and the new colonialism, what we call data colonialism. And that is that the function is the same. The function to extract, to dispossess, that we can trace, the continuities historically. But we want to be very careful not to say the slavery is the same, the violence is the same. After all, when we talk about the old colonialism, that's something that resulted in 95% of the population of the American continent being decimated through a process of a couple of centuries, and not just through violence, but also through disease. But we don't want to say, when I use Google or Facebook now, it's the same thing. It's going to result in the same kinds of slavery. It's going to result in the same kind of violence. Hopefully 95% of the population is not going to be eradicated just because we use Facebook. So we do want to be careful about those differences. I don't know if, Nick, you want to add something to that.
Yeah, I think what Ulises just said brings out what it opens up. If you use the parallel, not a metaphor, the parallel with that first stage of colonialism, with what's opening up as a historical period now in a precise way. It's about the land grab. It's about grabbing resources. So we know that historical colonialism transformed world history because suddenly European powers think, wow, the whole world's there for us. We can just take it. We found this new continent. We didn't even know it existed, and we can just take everything. And they proceeded to do that over 100, 200 years. And if they hadn't, we wouldn't have had capitalism. We wouldn't have had the fuel for capitalism, something theorists of capitalism often forget, that you can't have capitalism without colonialism. So we're saying that something equally world-changing is happening now, but the territory is a different one, and it's us, it's human beings. And people say, well, isn't that just a continuation of old exploitation of human beings? But I think that's a very flat view of history. It was a massive corporate discovery to say that human beings can just be plugged in. Actually, they don't even know they're plugged in. They just are plugged in. They don't even choose it. They're no longer an outside at all to capitalism anymore. That's a big change.
Yes.
Really, really big change. And in fact, it's hard to know where capitalism can go next, except, of course, plugging in the whole environment. And then you get to ag tech, which is also datafying the farm. But of course, the farmers as well at the same time. So it's pretty much part of data colonialism. But, long run, you won't be able to put a flower in the ground.
Yeah.
Without checking the data read off on some Hewlett-Packard thing that doesn't work because it hasn't had a download yet. That's where we're going.
I love what you're both saying, and you just said something, Nick, that I want to pick up on. You said that there's someone, they're not aware. A lot of us are not aware, which of course your book really does a great job in revealing. But in being aware, I've noticed that those in the higher echelons of society who uphold capitalism as an ideal, and that I've sometimes had to be I've campaigned for specific land grabs in Soho in London. I did a lot of campaigning for that area. And it strikes me that the concept of there being an arch enemy, a baddie figure, that's not really real, and that quite a lot of the individuals in positions of privilege and a lot of money are themselves not aware of what it is that the impact is to so many of us who are not in those privileged positions. So there's an unawareness across the board when I look at it, with those of us who are just updating our contracts with our iPhones and subscribing to things and staying locked into a Facebook way of communicating with people. And then those that are keeping those companies fueled, they're not bad people. They're the same as the kind of landlords and landowners I met when I was campaigning to save Soho. They're not bad people. They're completely unaware of what it is that their lifestyle is doing to many other people. I mean, that's when you add big tech to that, that's kind of, it's that traditional problem on steroids, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And I think when you say that there's this unawareness, I think what I would also point out is that the unawareness is very much intentional or by design. And that's what it means to be going through a process where we're having a new social order emerge, where certain habits, attitudes, ideas get ingrained into our heads without our awareness. And so we just install the new app or get the new phone or click the little box that says I accept without giving it a second thought. And actually a big example we use in the book is to do this transhistorical comparison of what it means to check that little box. And we found this very old document that Spanish conquistadors used to read before entering a village. And the document's called the requerimiento. In Spanish, it means the requirement or the demand. And I know your Spanish is good enough, Tim, to maybe appreciate that. But this is something that the conquistadors would read, and they would say, basically, we're going to enter your village and take everything you own. And we're going to make you slaves. And if you resist, we're going to kill you. And from now on, your property is ours. And they thought that by reading this legal document, which the kicker is that they would read it in Spanish to an audience that didn't understand it, that didn't speak Spanish. And they thought the act of reading this was enough to legitimize what they were going to about to do. And so now we click that little box in the same way without thinking about it.
Yeah, it's the EULA, right?
Yes, the terms of use, the end user agreements,
which
nobody understands, right? For all practical purposes, they might be in a language
who's
that
got
is
time?
completely...
Who's got time?
Exactly. So we don't understand it. So this unawareness that you're talking about is very much part of how the system is meant to work.
And is it our fault that we... Sorry, Nick, you were going to say something.
Well, I think you raised a really interesting point about awareness here, because Ulises and I are absolutely not preachers who are saying, look, we've got this special knowledge. You're all missing what's going on. Here's our wonderful wisdom. We're saying we're struggling with this too. We're part of this system, but we're puzzling, and we puzzled enough to write a book about it, just as you've written songs about it. And here's the result of that puzzlement. There's not a conspiracy there of bad people. It's something much deeper, more interesting, and more dangerous than that, which is the whole world becoming geared to a bad outcome. The same, of course, true with climate change. Some real bad is in there, but it's everything all of us have been doing for 100 years that has come together to this disastrous, potentially, outcome. Yes. So we've got to think we think about that. Just to give you another example of how hard it is to be aware of this. Another thing we say in the book is that we're at a new moment of history with tools. You used the word tools earlier on. We think tools are things we hold in our hand, right? And we hit the nail on the head with a hammer. That's using the tool. The nail's not going to come back and jump at us because we hold the tools, right? But the tool, and nor is the hammer going to hit us in the head unless we just do something silly. It's basically the tools we use today are coming for us. They're grabbing our data. In fact, unless we let them grab our data, they're not going to work for us. This is a really big change in human history when tools are reversible. They come back and bite you before you've even picked them up. But this is such a big change. We don't have a language for it. You can't put it into words. It's such a big refixing of things. Not surprisingly, we're all floundering to say, that can't be going on. That's impossible. Couldn't possibly be. They never do that. That is what they're doing.
Yes, what you're saying, it reminds me a bit of, I probably get the quote wrong, but it's Edward Snowden who said, you know, that it's saying that you're not really bothered about surveillance because you don't do anything wrong in your life. Is a bit like not supporting anybody else who doesn't have freedom of speech. Really, it's like it's not enough, is it? I had friends probably 10-15 years ago when I started saying you should be using this because the security is better. It's like, I don't do anything wrong, man. Well, I don't mind using WhatsApp, and I don't mind. And it's like, it's not about that. It's the collective thing, isn't it? It seems like such an ambitious task. It's not going to be easily sated to be able to take our conveniences away. And is there not, whilst we want progress and we want evolution, we want technology to help us be better to ourselves and better to the planet, these elements of convenience seem to be the things that are holding us back from really connecting. So it's not like we want to live in mud huts again and everyone's dying before they're 40, but there's got to be some kind of I don't know what I'm trying to say, like a way to say, no, it's okay that I can't immediately get this, so it's okay that I can wait 3 days, I can wait a week. It's okay, because actually the energy is no good for the environment. And, you know, this constant, the Amazon thing is, I find I've only just started feeling really strange about it. And I don't want to get anything on it anymore because it's great. I'll get it because it'll be there tomorrow. And it's part of myself. So I'm trying very slowly to be a bit more aware of the conveniences I have that actually I could probably live without and be perfectly happy. But that's one person at a time, isn't it? I mean, and just going, because, you know, we haven't got, I could talk to you for absolutely days and listen to what's brought you to this sort of epochal moment. I find it very revolutionary, what you've both written. But going back to what you said, it's about changing things for the better. It's about collective. It's about community. If it were the 60s, we'd go, right, we're having a meeting down the pub or in the village hall at 6 o'clock on Friday. If you're not happy about that thing that's happening, then you should be there. And now it's almost like I say the wrong word in a Facebook post and no one sees it, right? Because Facebook's like, nah, we're not pushing that through. I have countless games that I play to make some of my friends and fans be able to see stuff. But I'd say 25% of the things that I share on social media never reach the people that I want to reach because they've got the wrong word or the wrong link, or it's going to take them outside the platform. What's the first thing that we can do to create the collective that can start to help each other and others become more aware of what's happening really to our lives?
Well, first of all is imagination. That's the first thing. Is we've got to do what we're just doing now, which is talk about what if this goes on? Well, it's not very sustainable. The nonsense about blockchain will take all the electricity in the planet before they're finished. It's obviously not sustainable. That's an obvious truth we have to talk about. Then imagining a different future without blockchain. It's not hard to imagine at all because most people haven't had it thrust upon them yet, but they will do. So then we have to step back with the things we have got used to and imagine, well, what would it be to be without Facebook? What would it be for me to stop using Twitter so much, and so on and so forth? But as you said, you can't make that choice alone. You just can't do it alone because we're all in the social order, we're all pulling on each other. So if I suddenly snap the elastic and fall off, it kicks back on someone else. It has impacts. I can't just do that. We have to dismantle it together. And that's going to take a lot of time. But it comes back to rethinking the costs of connection. We want to connect. The book is absolutely not against connection. Connection is the basis of human life. So we've got to connect on terms that don't have such high costs. And that means that we have to start thinking again about, why do we have to connect so fast? Do we really need a platform with 2 billion users, more 2.4 billion, I think at the latest count, to connect with the people down the road?
Yeah, I have to ask you
as soon as you put it in those terms. And yet we take that assumption because Facebook had offered it to us. Let's build out alternative platforms, which are just as good for what we really need most of the time.
Yeah. I have to ask you both. For instance, it's a thought I had quite recently since doing these conversations. Why would most of us choose Facebook to connect with people over Zoom like this? Because to me, this is, we're talking to each other, we're listening to each other, sharing ideas. There's no adverts. There's no sense of broadcast. My bass guitar fell over, which I put up nicely in the background. It's like, it's fine. You know, I've not shaved properly. I'm not bothered. We're just having a chat, right? And then there's that side of it on Facebook where I just, you know, everything we do, we compose, we filter, we present, we broadcast. And there's an element of that finding a collective. I don't see how it can happen in those spaces because we're all broadcasting and filtering versions of ourselves. This isn't, we're just in our own environments talking to each other. I hated Zoom when it started, but it's the only one that I really feel comfortable with now. And I feel quite human, you know. Obviously, it's nothing as good as being in a real room. But what is it that I know I've got a lot of friends that would never in a million years consider, go, yeah, we'll join you, Tim, and let's all get off of that platform and stop broadcasting and let's really spend time connecting.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because even when you're talking about video conferencing, Tim, you use the word Zoom to refer to it, which is the name of the corporation. And I think, you know, there are alternatives to do what we're doing right now outside of Zoom. But that's part of the problem that we're discussing, right? That these platforms are created. And for instance, in my case, my school said, use Zoom. Here's your account. This is where you're going to have classes. So just like they told me 10 years ago, guess what? We're getting rid of email that we host here in the school. Now we're using Gmail because it's free. And so a lot of these options are kind of forced on us. And frankly, I also hated Zoom. I rather just even could communicate with my family for the longest time. Email was just fine, thank you. It was already a privilege to be able to send something and have it read, you know, instantaneously, as opposed to having to wait weeks for the mail to actually get to Mexico. But my point is that there's also this network effect that we call it. We can come up with an alternative to Facebook tomorrow. In fact, they're already out there, they exist. But my family is not on that platform. My friends are not on that platform. They are on Facebook and they have been there for many, many years. So that's what we're going to use. I think the last thing I want to say, though, is that it's okay for different solutions to be part of the options that we have available to us. And I think we're not here to say abandon Facebook, use this other platform. Use this other platform instead of Zoom. I think the solutions to these problems, whatever forms of community we're going to reimagine, we need to be open to the possibility that different things are going to work for different people. I know for some activists, Facebook is crucial. They need to be on Facebook. That's where they're going to reach an audience. So it's silly to tell them not to use Facebook. So it's okay for my family to use WhatsApp if that's what they're using. Hopefully we can have a conversation about what it means to use that, and maybe they'll choose to switch. But I think, yes, we're definitely not here to tell people this is the list of platforms you should use instead of this other list, because I think it's going to look different for everybody.
And part of the conversation is to shift away from saying it's all about social media, right?
Sure.
Because that's where this bigger order hits most of us. But as you were bringing out earlier, the many other aspects of the often far harsher and more dangerous for the long term that are nothing to do with social media whatsoever. So you've got agriculture all being about data extraction now. So farmers can't mend their own tractors now because that will be fiddling with a data extraction mechanism. So they have to get the company to get them to download a solution to their tractor. They're not allowed to mend their tractor because that breaches the policy. It's a big problem for farmers these days, in America particularly, but it's spreading across the world. Or health tech. You know, soon under American insurance rules, you probably won't be able to get insurance unless you're wearing something, a chip or something on your body that is going to be tracking your body all the time to try and cut down the health costs so your insurers can make even more money out of it.
That does sound like having something on your body sounds like a slave to me.
Well, it certainly goes in that direction, although we're always really careful about using that word because the brutalism of slavery is unimaginable. I'm just watching the Underground Railroad at the moment, and it's just a terrifying thing to watch. That TV serial based on the novel, which is based on the core facts of the Underground Railroad and the brutalities. So we're never saying this is exactly the same. It's saying there is a crucial point-to-point comparison between the game-changing nature of the land grab going on now and the game-changing nature of the land grab that made that brutality possible. The irony is that with capitalism having run for 200 years perfectly successfully with no one disobeying, basically, there haven't been many successful revolutions and perhaps none in the long run. Capitalism doesn't need that sort of violence to reproduce itself in radically new ways, such as data colonialism. It doesn't need it. The machine goes on with a few extra additions, like in the smart tractor on your farm. It's like a normal tractor. It's just radically different. It's based around appropriating every ounce of the creativity of that farmer through data and so on.
I know we're coming to the end of our hour, but if you've got time, I've made two little notes in your book. Maybe you can choose which one of you wants to respond to each bit. But they're just some phrases. I mean, there's lots of phrases that stick out to me. But I just thought for today, I'd ask you about these ones. So yeah, I'll just read it. The greatest threat that data colonialism poses is that in time, it works too well for us to want to live any other kind of existence, so that our complicity in losing hold on the possibility of freedom becomes complete. Now that terrified me when I read that. I just and of course complicity is a very brave word because you of course you both include yourselves in that. I know. I mean, again, it's you've been very responsible in the way you've written this book, so that it can be received and God willing has longevity. I'm, in writing songs and performance and stuff, I'm being a bit more brutalist in my approach because that's art, I suppose. But how does that feel? Encapsulate. I've never read that idea before. That we're the ones that have chained ourselves to the master?
Well, I think that is that from chapter 5. I think it might be, maybe.
And the master doesn't even know, almost.
Well, I think
Yeah.
they do.
It's-
Sadly, I think they do. As you point out in your film, there's a guy in the marketing agency who's looking and, target them. So there is always someone who knows. We got that idea you just read out. I came across a sentence in a book about the philosopher Hegel, who's famously incomprehensible, and he remains pretty incomprehensible. But there's some very smart people who've described his ideas. And one of them I came across about a book 30 years ago, said a sentence that, again, took my breath away. And I'm sort of retranslated it, as it were, in the sentence you just read out. This guy said, there's no greater unfreedom than to get to the point when you no longer remember what freedom was. That's the ultimate loss of freedom. To have lost the idea of freedom. In other words, the deepest freedom is the idea of imagining you could be free, which of course all those who rebelled against slavery had. They had this extraordinary belief that somehow they could become free. And indeed they did become free, with all the complications of the mess of American history. But what if that very idea was translated into always being chained, always being plugged in? That's what we're trying to catch.
And it's the always bit, isn't it? The choice to plug into something it's the same as playing video games in the 80s. It's fine, isn't it? But it's the choice that should be always given
one novel
us.
Captured this, which was Dave Eggers in his book The Circle, which we both read before we got started. It's a fantastic book, but sadly the film wasn't so good.
I know The Circle.
Where he basically expresses this core thing. What if our freedom, at the very best of us, the greatest moments, the greatest, are thanks to a corporation, as in the Truman Show, but even not just a one guy, but all of us. And that inspired us a lot, that book, that novel. And I think it's a reality we have to live with.
And I think we also were able to connect it to colonialism, because colonialism colonized not just the body, but the mind. I think, in creating what we now call the colonial subject, that wasn't just about the enslavement, as we've discussed a number of times during this conversation. It was also about adopting the attitudes of the colonizer, thinking about the world with the model that the colonizer presented, and thinking about yourself as less than or as occupying that specific space that the colonizer prescribed for you. So colonialism was an intellectual project as well, in terms of just plugging into your head. But by the same token, I think what's gives me hope is that then it can be resisted also through imagination. It can be resisted. We can start to resist it in our minds as well, through this creative process of imagination, of creating culture, of creating movies and music and texts that can help others perhaps begin to unthink this social order.
I'd listened to you both said imagination now, and it reminds me of George Monbiot. I don't know if you know the journalist, writer, and environmentalist George Monbiot, and he's repeatedly talked about we've kind of come to the end and as far as we can get with the kind of narratives that we provide our society with, and we need new stories. And both of you, my answer was, how do we get out of this mess? And if we break it down to just simple slogans that will fit on t-shirts, it's imagination is the way we get out of the mess.
Yeah. Step off the road, as we say in the end of the book. We're on the road, just step to one side. Don't stay on this road. Doesn't mean to say we built a new road yet, but just get off this one we know is not working, and stand there together with the rest of us, and we'll work something out. We'll work out a different possibility. That's got to be the start.
It's so amazing to talk to you again, Nick, and to talk to you for the first time, Ulises. And you both also seem like the people who wrote the book I was reading, which is that's kind of magical. It's like that thing when you get into a band and you meet one of them at the gig. It's really, I really love what you've done, and I think it's very brave. And I think the more we push your work, the better, for more people to understand, and also for more people to be inspired to write their own take on what you've captured here. I like to think of you both as a combined character of Toto in The Wizard of Oz, because it's Toto, obviously, that rips the curtain apart away, and you see the little man.
Oh, right.
Yes.
He's the one that reveals what's really behind the controls. It's not the great and powerful Oz. It's just another human, you know.
Toto lives.
Yeah. And that's sort of, I see this really amazing tenacity that you've had to take on, you know, a lot of the problems of the last, well, since the Industrial Revolution, really, isn't it? I mean, it's hundreds of years that have grown us into this state that we're in. And I think it's a really original and refreshing take on how to get out of the mess we're in. And I, you know, really wish you luck with the future of the book. You know, I support it. I'm going to carry on telling everybody that they should read it anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Good luck with your album. We really like the songs on it and the film and everything. It's great to have a meeting of minds and not to feel quite so lonely.
Yeah, good. Yeah, me too. So absolutely.
Let's connect more.
Yeah, sure.
I think so.
Yes.
And try to bring the collective you're talking about together from wherever those souls might come from. I think this is it. It's finding the others that feel the same way. And I still remember the first email I wrote, is that I think I've accidentally written a musical of your book. And it feels like that. And I felt less lonely as well. So Ulises Mejias and Nick Couldry.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this super connected conversation.
Great pleasure.
Take care.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Bye.
Till next one. Bye.